Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm glad some of us actually managed to make it. We were stuck on the M4 and we didn't think we were going to make it. We had to detour and get off the motorway and so on. Today, we've got Stephen with us, Stephen Evans. He is the president of the National Secular Society. You can see how informal we are, that we've got two presidents here and no security at all.
Actually, I'm a lower rank. I'm only the chief executive.
Oh, you're only the chief executive.
I'm top shot.
Yes. Well, I'll let Stephen tell you what National Secular Society stands for. As you know, one thing that we encourage is cross-pollination, talking to other groups, trying to understand them, because obviously if you're living in a society, in a country, it helps if you know what other people are thinking, etc. I mean, one reason we oppose religious schools is the fact that it polarizes the community. I mean, Mudassar's best friend is a Sikh. If the Sikh had gone to a Khalsa school and Mudassar had gone to an Islamic school, the two of them might never have met and become best friends. And National Secular Society has similar aims. So let's hear them straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Stephen?
Thank you.
Welcome.
Shall I hold this?
Yeah, higher up. Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to speak today. I really do appreciate it. It's a real pleasure to be here. So, as you've heard, my name is Stephen Evans. I'm the Chief Executive of the National Secular Society. So, for those of you that aren't familiar with our work, we're a non-profit campaigning organisation that works for the separation of religion and state and equal respect for everyone's human rights, so no one is either advantaged or disadvantaged on account of their beliefs. We've been around since 1866, founded by a man called Charles Bradlaugh. He was a liberal, a radical freethinker, a brilliant lawyer, who was elected as an MP to Parliament in 1880. However, because of his well-known beliefs, he was an atheist, he was refused the right to take the religious oath, which was necessary to be a member of Parliament at the time. He had to swear to God to be in Parliament. So he was denied the opportunity to take his seat. Now, upon trying to take his seat, he was arrested after a scuffle with parliamentary staff and police, and he was briefly imprisoned. He was in fact the last person to be imprisoned in a small prison cell that sits just beneath the bell of Big Ben in the Big Ben clock tower in Parliament. He was the last person to be imprisoned there. And he had to contest 4 subsequent by-elections before finally being allowed to take his seat in Parliament, and it was his Oaths Act that enabled all MPs, irrespective of their religion or belief, to affirm rather than swear an oath to God, and that's a right that's still enjoyed today by many MPs. Since then, over the past 150 years, we've been at the forefront of a number of social reforms, including women's access to birth control, reproductive rights, liberalisation of Sunday trading laws, equality laws, and more recently the abolition of the UK's blasphemy law. And our work today is still very much focused on challenging religious privilege and campaigning for a secular state that's free and fair for everyone. So in short, we campaign for secularism. But what exactly is secularism, you may well ask? Because I don't think enough people, certainly in the UK, really have a clear idea about what secularism is. As a concept, it's poorly understood and, I think, not very well defended. Secularism is also routinely and unfairly maligned and mischaracterized as being something that's hostile to religion or something that seeks to undermine people's religious freedom. And I think that's a great shame, because secularism is in fact a protector of people of faith and their rights and freedoms, and a principled defender of many of the values that people of all faiths and none hold dear. So like human rights, democracy, freedom of expression, free speech, secularism, I would argue, is essential to modern life and the way we live life today, because it underpins so many of the rights and freedoms that we all enjoy in a liberal democracy. Now, of course, until the modern era, the integration of religion and political life had been taken for granted. The political order was always tied to an official religion in Christian Europe, pre-Christian Europe, and indeed across the Arabic world. But from the 18th century onwards, some European states began to set up their political order on a different basis. Not religion, but the rule of law through non-religion specific values embedded in countries' constitutions became the foundation of many states. A movement that we now call is known as secularism. In others, like here in the UK, a sort of de facto secularism emerged as political values and civil and criminal law altered their professed foundation from a shared religion to a non-religious basis. So here in the UK, despite the Church of England remaining the state church, at least State Church of England, the days of judges using their benches to preach Christianity and claim that the Bible is the basis of British law are gone, and rightly so. So the principles of secularism are interpreted differently from individual to individual and from state to state. Secularism doesn't really have any fixed DNA. Countries will have their own interpretation, their own flavour of secularism, informed by their own history and their own particular set of circumstances. So there are a number of officially secular countries, but secularism in India differs from that in America, which differs from the secularism that you find in France, which differs from Turkish secularism, and so on. But perhaps it's the concept of laïcité in France, the 1905 law that declared France to be a secular republic, and Thomas Jefferson's wall of separation between church and state in the United States that are perhaps most defined modern concepts of secularism. Now, we at the National Secular Society campaign for a very British form of secularism as defined by our secular charter, which I will share with you afterwards. This charter, which guides all of our campaigning, is really a sort of codification of live and let live, but within limits, and it will start to give you an idea of what secularism would look like if put into practice in the UK. So the separation of religion and state is really the foundation of secularism. This is in direct opposition to theocracy, where religion is the state. Secularists hold that religion and state should be separate and not interfere in each other's affairs. So here in the UK we don't have a theocracy, like what we see in Brunei, which has been in the news this week, and Saudi Arabia. But neither do we really have a secular state either. The Church of England is recognised as being the official state church. The Queen is both the head of state, our head of state, and the supreme governor of the Church of England. And in fact, only an Anglican can become head of state in the United Kingdom. We have 26 Anglican bishops that sit in the House of Lords as of right, giving them privileged access to political power and a unique influence over the laws that affect us all. The bench of bishops in the House of Lords is perhaps the most glaring example of religious privilege in Britain. Seats they're given not by merit but by virtue of their office. And Iran is in fact the only other country in the world which gives unelected clerics automatic representation in its legislature. Now, it's sometimes suggested that rather than remove the bishops, what we should do is extend this religious representation in Parliament to other faith groups. Now, I think this would be as impractical as it would be undesirable. Religions shouldn't be singled out for special treatment or special representation. Faith leaders can't be assumed to represent the people of the faith. The Pope certainly doesn't represent the views of Catholics, certainly not when it comes to abortion or contraception. The Church of England's line on assisted dying differs from that of the Christians in the pews. And who exactly would speak for Muslims? In my experience, the vast majority of religious people, like everyone else for that matter, are independent thinkers. There is no one homogenous Muslim community. There is no Catholic community. There is no Christian community. There is no atheist community. There are individual citizens within those communities. So we shouldn't allow religious groups to be spoken for in that way. So we want to see an end to religious representation in politics so everyone can be treated as individual citizens rather than members of faith communities. Extending religious representation in the Lords to other religions would be both unworkable and unpopular. It would run the risk of creating sectarian tensions. So instead of extending religious privilege, we seek to end it, and that would mean disestablishment. Now, the term disestablishment is sometimes a source of confusion. Some people think it means abolition, when what it really means is independence. So separating the Church of England from the government is not only the best thing for equality and democracy, it would also give the Church of England a greater freedom to pursue its own goals in its own way. It would be detached from the state and therefore free to succeed or fail in the marketplace of ideas in which all other religions and ideologies must compete in. Christianity is a major influence, but only one amongst many that shape our current ways of life in the UK. We have a strong Christian heritage, for sure, but we are not in any meaningful sense, a Christian country. The UK today is a nation of many religions and denominations. Around half of the population do not hold or practice any religious beliefs. So our political structure should really reflect the reality of changing times by separating religion from the state. Now, another aspect of our secular charter and the reforms we campaign for concerns the way we educate children. So the role of religion in our schools is probably one of the most contentious and contested areas of public policy in the UK. We just need to see the protests that have been going on outside Birmingham schools because the state are trying to introduce relationships education where young children are just given an awareness of diversity and difference. Now, in England and Wales, a third of our publicly funded schools are faith schools, legally designated schools, legally designated as having a religious character. These include Church of England, Church in Wales, Roman Catholic, Jewish and Methodist schools. And since 1998, Hindu, Sikh and Muslim schools have also opened, as well as an increase in number of Christian schools of no specific religious denomination. Church of England schools are the most common still. In fact, there are so many church schools now that there are more children worshipping in Church of England schools every day than there are people worshipping in churches on any given Sunday morning. And now people in churches, of course, are there because they choose to be, they want to be. But in schools, pupils are forced, compelled or coerced into worshipping. And surely, I would hope you would all agree, that's not worship. What worship should really be about. So faith schools are often defended in terms of parental choice. But the demand that the state provides religious schools, I think, neglects the civic purpose of education and is a divisive and a dangerous demand that I would argue should be resisted. Because the emergence of minority faith schools, in particular, means that we're dividing children not only along religious lines, but also along ethnic lines, which I think is a very dangerous thing to do. So a better model, I would argue, is inclusive secular schooling where children of all faith backgrounds and none are educated together. Education provides a unique golden opportunity to promote and encourage integration, mutual trust and mutual understanding, and that opportunity is being squandered by a policy of funding faith-based education. Of course, faith should be a welcome component of society, as with any other form of diversity, and that should be the case in schools too. But it seems quite obvious to me that if we're going to create a more cohesive, integrated and tolerant society where people of all faiths and none can live together well, educating children together is an essential part of that. Now that, of course, is not to deny parents the right to bring their children up in a particular faith tradition. They must, of course, have freedom to do that, but they shouldn't expect to do that by the state. Schools aren't there to mirror parents' religious views or to reinforce parents' religious views. They shouldn't encourage shouldn't encourage children to live in insular religious communities. They should prepare children for life in multicultural, diverse 21st century Britain as equal citizens. So I think we really need to confront this notion that secularism is antagonistic towards religion, or that secularists want to eradicate religion from the public sphere, from public life. It's certainly true that we want to see religion's public role greatly diminished. I think an end to publicly funded faith schools is clearly an example of this. But we should support an open society in which people are free to express their beliefs, but at the same time be very clear that there are limits to religious freedom. And religious freedom has really become a major theme of our work lately, because it seems whenever we campaign for secularist principles to be put into practice, our opponents argue that we're trying to unfairly restrict religious freedom. In almost every area of our work in challenging religious privilege, our detractors accuse us of eroding or attacking religious freedom. This perhaps highlights a common but fundamental misunderstanding, sometimes a willful misunderstanding, of the whole concept of religious freedom and human rights. So Article 9 of the Human Rights Act protects our freedom of thought, conscience, as well as our religion or beliefs. Now, some rights are absolute, so the right to life, for example, or the right not to be subject to torture. These are absolute rights. Other human rights are qualified rights. Article 9 is a qualified right, meaning that the freedom to manifest a religion or belief can be restricted in certain circumstances. So religious freedom isn't a free pass to do whatever you want in the name of your religion. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. The right to belief is absolute. You can believe whatever you like. But the right to manifest, to act out on that belief is not absolute. We only have the right to manifest our religion or our belief insofar as it doesn't impinge on the rights and freedoms of others. So secularism really seeks to ensure that the right to manifest a religion is always balanced by other considerations and competing rights, including the right to be free from religion. So you have the right to your religion and belief, but not necessarily to impose that belief on others who don't share that belief. And where a religious practice causes harm to others, or harm to wider society, or even to animals in the case of non-stun slaughter, the state does have a right to restrict that religious practice. So where we have democratically decided upon laws, for example around equality, free speech, or animal welfare, I don't think there should be any religious exemptions. Religion shouldn't provide an excuse for not following the law of the land, provided that the law is fair, rational and exists for a good reason. And in an increasingly diverse society, secularist principles, I would argue, are more important than ever. Societies can only really cohere where citizens have a level playing field and a common set of principles and laws to unite around. Secularism offers us that chance to live in peace with others whose creed is different from our own. And look around the world today and you'll see that that is not something that can be taken for granted. Now, a final aspect of secularism that I wish to address today is the way it's often unhelpfully conflated or confused with atheism or other non-religious worldviews such as humanism. So atheism is simply a lack of belief in gods. Secularism has nothing to say about the existence of gods or otherwise. Secularism simply provides a framework for a democratic society. It doesn't seek to challenge the tenets of any particular religion or belief, nor does it seek to impose atheism on anybody. Secularism is simply a framework for ensuring equality, freedom and fairness throughout society, in politics, in education, in the law and elsewhere, for believers and non-believers alike. So whatever your religious beliefs, you can be a secularist. So in summary, the key principles of secularism are: number one, separation of religious institutions from the state. So a public sphere where religion may participate but not dominate. Number two, freedom to practice one's own faith or belief without causing harm, or to change your religion, or not to have one according to one's own conscience. And number three, equality, so that our religious beliefs or lack of them doesn't put any of us at a disadvantage or at an advantage. And in our multi-faith and pluralistic society, I believe that sticking to these principles remains our best hope for peaceful coexistence. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are we able to take some questions?
Yes.
Is that, yeah?
What I was thinking throughout listening to you, that what you are talking about is no different from my belief as a Muslim, to all the three things that you've mentioned are of importance to each individual living on this earth. But unfortunately, we don't see that. And the first time I ever heard of secularism was when the founder of Pakistan, Qaid-e-Azam, used that word to say that he's creating a country which will have, it will be a secular state, but unfortunately it's not.
No.
So hence we all are here, and a lot of people who are pushed out because of the religious elite who think they are elite to dominate and make life difficult for the minorities of a land.
Yeah, but it's a shame because secularism should be the great protector. Secular should be what makes, no matter what the religious majority is in a country, if you have secularism, then that protects the minorities. So secularism is often seen as something that is there to protect the non-religious, and actually it protects religious minorities in exactly the same way. So religious minorities have a lot to support in secularism, I would argue.
Can I ask the audience a question? When Stephen was talking, did you feel that you've heard all this before?
Yes.
Yes.
Where?
In this room.
In this room.
And from my childhood, I was brought up in Pakistan. I came here at the age of 20. And all my childhood, Fridays was an important day to go to the mosque. So here, my mother took us to the mosque for the Friday prayer. And we've been listening to all this and coming to live in this land. I got married, came to England, and carried on the same way. I don't feel I am different. Yes, I am different now, but different in a better way. I learned a lot from this land as well, and brought it a lot of my qualities that were instilled in me. So sadly, we don't celebrate and appreciate that, and we need to do that. And as Shahid says, that we hear this all the time, and every word that came out of your mouth was what we believe in and truly believe in. It's not just hearsay.
You see, if I may, Holy Prophet Muhammad was the first person to actually create a secular society. When he went to Medina, he said, all of us have to live together in this piece of land. So let's live together so that no one's rights are impinged. And he was secular to the extent that he said, Islamic law is only for Muslims. Jews will be judged by Jewish law. Christians will be judged by Christian law. And if there are others and they have their own laws and so on, then they'll be judged by that. But unfortunately, the whole thing, as you say, has been turned on its head. And I'm glad you mentioned one thing, and that's a great misconception about secularism, that secularism and atheism are one and the same.
Yes.
And you hear this over and over, particularly in religious societies, like places like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and so on. Oh, so you don't believe in God? Did I say that?
I think that.
Yeah,
I just wanted to add to what Shahid was saying and what you said. Your talk today is summed up in one verse of the Quran, and that is there is no compulsion in religion.
Absolutely. No.
So the Quran tells us we have no right to compel anyone to believe in our faith or even in their own faith. So we agree with what you said.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, not only that, if you look at the word deen, that's translated as religion, you can equally translate it as there is no compulsion in the way you choose to live, which is a much broader statement than just belief or not belief, if you see what I mean. Because that brings in all the other issues that you alluded to in your speech. That it's the right way and the wrong way are clear. But you can't force anyone to walk along the right. It's up to him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want to choose. You want to choose to ignore the sat nav and take the exit here, and then take another 3 hours to get to Dar es Salaam. That's up to you. Entirely up to you. But the sat nav is there. That you were going to say something.
Yes, I was going to say that when our Holy Prophet Muhammad came into this world, everyone followed some religion or other, or a set of beliefs. Although his own people didn't actually have an organized religion as such, like Jews or Christians, but they had some beliefs in their idols and their rituals and social practices were organized accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, what the Prophet Muhammad did after his emigration to Medina was that he tried to have to organize a system where all these groups would practice their own beliefs in the way that they determined and they wanted to. So that is a sort of secular state of that time, because everyone followed what they called one religion or another, and they accepted him in Medina as the chief judge. So he wasn't just judging for Muslims, but for example, Jews would go to him to get some matter among them judged, because they believed that if they had a Jew as a judge, he would be partial to one group of them or another. And so the system which he set up was that if Muslims then become in a majority and are ruling, then they have covenants with people of with different communities, and those communities are then internally independent to follow their own ways, and they make some contribution to the running of the central government. But just the important thing is, I don't want to go on for too long, because this is quite a lengthy subject, that the Holy Quran tells us, or tells Muslims to, in their government, it says, give your trusts, hand over your trusts to such people as are worthy of them, and do justice between people. Now, people in the Quran means anyone. And doing justice between people is where their beliefs don't come into it, only their actions. When there is a case against someone of some wrongdoing or other, or he goes and seeks some rights, you look at what he has actually done, and you disregard what his religion or belief was. And now that is the cornerstone of the religion of Islam in dealing with people. And the Prophet Muhammad illustrated this in practice many times when some non-Muslim would go to him with a grievance against a Muslim, for example, and he would judge it on the basis of facts. So facts,
which is how secular law works.
Is the only thing.
Exactly.
And and when we do spot when there are incursions into that, where Sherry Booth QC, who's the wife of Tony Blair, she passed judgment once on an individual. In passing sentence, she made reference to his religious beliefs, and as a religious person, you should have known better. And we kind of called her up on that, because that's not a comment that I think should be made in a secular court. you should not be making any reference to people's religion or belief, because that's irrelevant. You judge them on their actions and the law, and that's it. You should not pay reference to their beliefs. And also, quite recently, there was a judge called Justice Haddon Cave, who was sentencing a terrorist, a Muslim terrorist. Yeah, and he started telling that he'd interpreted the Quran wrong. He started telling what the right interpretation, the correct interpretation of the Quran was. Now, you may agree or disagree with the judge, but it's not the role of a judge to interpret the Quran. That's for theologians and individual believers, I would argue, and not the role of judges. So, yeah, wherever we find...
You wrote to the Lord Chancellor, I think?
We did, because we think it's an important point of principle. So whether we agree with Justice Haddon Cave or not, it's not the role of judges to interpret the Quran or the Bible or any other religious holy book. So yeah, we're quite keen to police the secular basis of law, because it is very important. If we're going to be all treated fairly and equally, then we need to keep religion out of the legal process.
What I was saying is, how is it policed? How do you gather information that things are not happening the way they should be happening?
Well, we have quite an open legal system, so judges' rulings are made public, often are reported in the free press. So, you know, when we see that a judge has, in their sentencing remarks, made reference to someone's religion, then, you know, we act upon it. We act upon it. Yeah.
I'll be taking Mushtaq's point further about there is no compulsory religion. There is a small chapter at the end of the Holy Quran which says, I can't convince you, and you will never be able to convince me. So you live the way you want, and I live the way I want, and surely we'll see the result.
Well, yes and no, but I would actually argue, I would defend people's freedom to try and convince others. But there's a certain time and a place for that, I would argue. So I don't think it should happen in schools, for example. I don't think schools should be places where we try and proselytise and evangelise to children. But in the public sphere, we've actually quite often defended Christian preachers who have said things that people find a little bit controversial when judging their sermons, when preaching their sermons. So there's been a number of instances in the UK where Christian street preachers have actually been arrested under some sort of Public Order Act because someone has taken offence at what they've said. We've defended the Christian street preachers' right to proselytise and to express their beliefs in the public sphere, and sure, some people might be offended by what he has to say, but I think being offended from time to time is the price that you pay for living in a free society. So I don't think anyone has the right not to be offended. So yeah, I like the idea of people proselytising and trying to convince others. I mean, this is what the public sphere is all about. This is about debate. This is about whatever it is, whether it's a religious idea or a political idea. You know, the free speech is the air that we breathe when we want to have public discourse.
Religious communities can have their own sort of out-of-school classes.
Yes, of course.
Such as when parents at home teach their children moral values or their religion.
Yeah.
So similarly, you could have things like Sunday schools and so on, or after-hours schools where they learn about their religion.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, parents absolutely have the right to raise their child in the faith tradition, and that will include supplementary lessons, whether it be in the Quran or any or language. Then of course that's fine. The problem becomes when parents want to take their children out of mainstream schooling and educate them exclusively in religion, which we've seen. There's lots of, unfortunately, something we've been working on is the growth in the unregistered illegal school sector, particularly in areas of London where Orthodox Jewish parents and Muslim parents are withdrawing their children from mainstream education and just giving them a religious education. So, You know, a religious education is always supplementary to mainstream
I
education.
think a child's right should be to be educated in a school, a secular school.
Yeah.
And the parents, I think, in that case, are doing wrong to their children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one thing that will change. I think it's quite an old-fashioned view that children belong to their parents, but actually, under international human rights law, children are their own individual rights holders. You know, they actually are humans, and they have human rights. Yeah, so, you know, wherever any form of religious parenting or any other sort of parenting encroaches upon the rights of the child, then the state has a duty to say to that parent, well, to protect the rights of the child.
Yeah.
Because if the parent isn't protecting those rights, the state should.
It's a part of the law, isn't it? Best interest of the child.
The best interest of the child. That was the Children Act. It was a key piece of legislation.
To take into account when they, lots of family law.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
But you say the dangerous thing about religious schools is this. If you've gone to a Muslim school, then what are you going to do if you want to go to university? Are you going to demand that a Muslim university is set up in England?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, a Muslim university is set up in England. Then what are you going to demand? That, there should be a Department of Social Security for Muslims and a Department of Social Security for the rest of
Yeah, because in the real world, for most of us at least, in the real world, you encounter people of other faiths and beliefs. So schools should really be a kind of a microcosm of the real world, of what's happening out there. So when you walk out, when you interact with public institutions, and we do anything in life, ideally you're doing that in a pluralistic, mixed, multicultural society. So schools should reflect that. And the problem we have, particularly in the East End of London with Orthodox Jewish schools, is the schools are only preparing children for life in insular religious communities, and they just can't operate outside of. They're not even learning English in some of these schools, so they just can't operate outside of that community. So that imprisons them within that community and denies them their freedom and their rights as individual citizens.
Certain common values of humanity which have been, such as not killing people, which have been enshrined in religions. And in modern times, non-religious people have tried, well, that was an extreme example, have tried to vary these for other people's benefits. And what I'm referring to are examples such as abortion is legal, but there are doctors who, on grounds of conscience, decline to perform it.
Yeah.
That's only an example. So you get this conflict between a person's deeply held religious beliefs and what is allowed in the law, and the law might go further and sort of require it to be done. So this is where these conflicts arise, where a law might require a person to do something which is against his religious belief, which is not something newfangled, but it's a long established belief in the history of that religion.
I think the law has that right, where a woman's right to decide for themselves within certain limits, within agreed limits, what they do with their bodies is enshrined in the law. But if the doctor doesn't want to perform that abortion, then they have a conscience objection, a right to object to performing that procedure. But I think where you do have exemptions like that, they should be quite narrow, because people should really be able to carry out the job they're employed to do in full. So I'm not really in favour of these conscience exemptions being widened at all. I think they need to be quite narrow. So if there's an aspect of your job that you don't want to do, perhaps that's the wrong job for you sometimes, I would argue. So for example, if Tesco wanted to employ someone to work on the checkouts, but that person was, let's say, a Muslim who refused to handle alcohol or pork, then I would argue that Tesco has the right to say, sorry, but this job does involve handling alcohol and pork, and you'll be putting the customers at a disadvantage if they turn up at the checkout, they're trying to make their purchase, and suddenly they have to go and get someone else to do you because they won't do you. So I think that puts the customer at a disadvantage, and Tesco are well within their rights to say, sorry, if you're not going to handle pork, if you're not going to handle alcohol, then this isn't the job for you. And I think that's fine.
I can give you an example of my very first job in UK was working at Sainsbury's.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know anything about alcohol. So I said, please don't put me here. If you're selling it, I'm not selling it. I would happily stand here and look after it.
Yeah.
But if somebody asked me a question about what is a whiskey and what is a gin and what is the best wine,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a clue.
No.
So they very kindly never put me there, never gave me duty in that area.
Okay.
So I think we need to look at people's generosity and kindness in accommodating a situation like that. But I can understand when they get to a stage where the law has to play a role.
Yeah, I think we should reasonably accommodate wherever we can, so long as no one's put out by that.
Yes.
But you see the person in that example on the checkout, that person is neither buying the alcohol
or consuming it,
nor are they selling it.
Yeah.
No, not even that.
They are merely acting as this sort of a,
Mm-hmm.
in operating the till.
But also, if you think of the position of the customer, it's almost as if, so I'm going to the checkout, I'm buying a bottle of whiskey, and someone says, no, I can't serve you, I'm not going to serve you. It's almost like they're making some sort of judgment on you.
Yes, yes.
And so the customer will well be within their rights, I think, to feel somewhat aggrieved and judged in that way. So I think Tesco has a right to want to give the best service possible to customers, and I think that involves customers not being told, sorry, I'm not going to serve you, I'll get someone else to serve you. But you know, where we can reasonably accommodate, we should. Where there's no disadvantage, where it's quite easy to accommodate someone.
Someone on the checkout might refuse to handle what they regard as unhealthy food, too high a fat content. You can say, this is not good for you, I'm not saying.
I think if I was the chief executive of Tesco's, I would say to this person, well, this part of your salary was actually earned by selling pork, wine and so on. So obviously it's unlawful for you.
So we can't give you
You have 25% of your salary, so we'll only give you 75%. But you see, I have to say that, number one, people I genuinely believe don't appreciate how accommodating, particularly British society.
Yes, absolutely.
When I came to this country, well, the whole family came to this country, I went to this school, I was the only Muslim there, and I was made a prefect. And once a week a prefect had to go and read a lesson in the assembly. So when it would be my turn, I would take the Holy Quran. And near Christmas I read, the angel came and said to Mary, you'll have a son, and Mary said, and so on and so forth. Now, strictly speaking, I was actually committing an offense. Because I should have been reading something from the New Testament.
I think Britain is,
No one said anything that. Master didn't say. Now, let's look at the other side. Can you imagine this happening in a country where Muslims are in a majority, that a Hindu goes up and says, I'm going to read a lesson from Vedas?
No.
This is a reflection on how far we are from Islam.
Yes.
Going back to Tesco's, every time I went for a job interview, I said, I'm a Muslim. On Fridays, I leave my office at 11 and I'll come back at 3. Because I have to go to Friday prayers. Under those conditions, you want to give me a job, give me a job. If you don't want to, it's been nice knowing you. Now these people, when they get a job at Tesco's, don't they know they'll be put at the checkout? Don't they know they'll have to handle home, don't they know that they'll have to handle alcohol and so on? I mean, does it suddenly transpire out of the blue?
Yeah.
So, you know, I have to say, I get very irate by these people that they're trying to take unfair advantage of a tolerant society, and as a result, they're pushing this society to extremes towards the right. So in that customer who's now got to wait for 5 minutes for another guy to come and, you know, touch the bottle of alcohol and so on, you know, he's not going to get. I'll give you an example. We were coming to a meeting here, and there was a Hindu festival or something, and this road was closed, and we were having a terrible time getting here, and I was cursing and swearing at Hindus and so on. And suddenly I turned around and I said to my wife, you know, for Eid and Eid Miladun Nabi and so on, lots of mosques do exactly the same thing.
Of course. It's give and take, isn't it?
Do we ever consider the fact that we are inconveniencing others? And what message of Islam are we giving to people by inconveniencing them? And well, there we are.
So it sounds like there's been furious agreement. Is there any disagreement on anything?
I just have a comment.
Yeah, go on.
So,
It's always more interesting.
going back to the difference between secularism and atheism, I mean, I think there is a problem like in Islam or in other religions, there are radical Muslims, Christians, and Jews or Hindus, which completely present a false picture of their respective religion. But also, I think the people who call them secular, like Richard Dawkins, they just want to completely ban the religion. They think that nothing ever has come good out of a religion, or nothing ever will come good out of religion also in the future. So, I mean, also, what's your take on people like this, like Richard Dawkins?
Richard Dawkins, do you all know who Richard Dawkins is? Evolutionary biologist, very fierce critic of all religion, it seems. Well, he's free to express his beliefs. I think in an open society, he's free to do it. But yes, when I don't think he should be criticising religion with a secularist hat on. If he's a secularist, then he should stick to secularism. But there's nothing wrong with atheists criticising religion if they want to. I think sometimes atheists have a very simplistic view on religion. Those that can't see the wisdom in religion must be blind, because religion has been a way of codifying universal values that we all share, and there's nothing wrong with that. I certainly don't think religion has a monopoly on morality and ethics. I think a lot of it has come from philosophy and non-religious ways of looking at the world. So, but I think there's a lot of things that, whether you're religious or not religious, you share. Now, religion has codified some of these things. Religion has created many buildings of beauty, many works of literature, art. You know, religion has enriched the world in so many ways. So I've got no time for these debates over whether religion is a force for good or a force for evil. It's obviously both. It's obviously both. Religion can be a force for good, it can be a force for bad. Good things are done in the name of religion, bad things are done in the name of religion. Good things have been done in the name of atheism, very bad things have been done in the name of atheism. If you look at Russian state communism, China and Russia, you know, that was all very atheistic, and that wasn't all good either. So wherever you find humans, you find good and bad. And so, yeah.
But definitely then it means that he's not a secular, he has got not a secular approach, because I mean, what you have said, I completely agree with this thing, that nobody should be advantaged or disadvantaged because if one has a belief or no belief. But people like Richard Dawkins, I think they just also want to impose their own view on other people.
Well, that's fine. I think that's fine. I think if you want to impose your view on me, that's fine. I don't mind that. And if I want to impose my view, if Richard Dawkins wants to impose his view, that's fine. You can either listen to it and change your view, or you can listen to it and not change your view, or you can not listen to it at all. That's your try. But I think it is consistent to be an atheist who doesn't like religion and a secularist, because I would say Richard Dawkins would argue is for the most part religion is stupid. I think that's what his view is. But at the same time, Richard Dawkins would argue for your right to practice your religion. So he doesn't want to ban religion.
I get always this impression from.
No, he doesn't like religion. He's a big critic of religion. But he doesn't want to ban it. He believes in freedom to practice your faith.
Well, that would be a good thing.
Yeah,
he believes in a dialogue where everybody can express his views.
Yeah.
He has also the right, and one should respect his views.
I think.
Well, you don't have to respect his views, but you have to respect his right to hold those views and express those views. So I'm a big, passionate believer in free speech. I wouldn't ban any speech. I think you should be allowed to say whatever you want, as long as you're not inciting people to violence. As long as you're not doing that, you should be able to say whatever you want.
That's
So
the best thing on earth. That's the best thing on earth.
free speech.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah.
But then people abuse it, and then it becomes a bad word.
Hate speech.
But I think that is the thing that can move communities, that can move people in the right direction. Unless we talk and say what we feel, whatever we are thinking might be wrong. And by saying it, you might get at the end of it to a conclusion that, oh yes, I was wrong. But unless we do that, unless we talk and unless we express our views, there will always be sort of things in our head going round
exactly.
and not airing those. And thinking either we are bad or the world is bad.
Yeah. Restricting free speech does nothing to take away hatred and bigotry and intolerance. So sometimes there is I think a tendency to, when people are saying things that aren't very nice, to try and stop them saying those things. I think that's counterproductive. I think you have to, if you support free speech, then I think you need to support the speech of people who you find odious, offensive, and horrible. And so I would defend anyone's right to say anything as horrible as they want. Doesn't mean I like it. I may want to use my free speech to argue back at it, but what I never want to do is shut them up, because I don't think that works.
We need to learn how to do that. We are never given those tools in our growing up. There are flaws there that we are not encouraged to speak and say. And that I find very sad.
But Mustak has a very good prescription. He always says to me, especially, respond, don't react.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I think we need to learn to disagree better, and I think that's why at schools we should be having debates and arguments and looking at things from all different perspectives, because then I think we'll hopefully learn to disagree better, because there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. The important thing is that you don't hate. Do they teach secularism? No. No, and they should, because what we're looking for, the National Secular Society, is an end to religious education. So religious education in the UK originally was set up to teach the Christian faith. It was about inculcating children into Christianity. Since then it's evolved into something a little bit more pluralistic, so you teach about different religions and beliefs, which is fine. I'm quite happy with that. But at the same time, I think we spend too much time on religious education, and what we need to turn religious education into is to some sort of citizenship education, where you learn about the diversity of religion and other belief that's out there, where you learn about human rights, and you learn about concepts such as secularism, and you just learn about, it's about civics really, it's about learning how democracy works, what it means to be a citizen, and you learn about tolerance, respect, about diversity, and yes, a little bit about people's religions and beliefs. So you give children a whole rounded education about religion and belief, but you don't teach them how to be religious. You just teach them how to be religiously literate. And I think that includes an education about secularism. So we've just launched some resources for schools all about secularism, called Exploring Secularism. So yeah, and the next thing, what we want to do is actually get secularism as a word, as a concept, somewhere onto the curriculum, but there's nowhere it clearly fits at the moment. So I think if we reform religious education into a new subject that teaches about religion and belief and about citizenship, about rights and responsibilities, then I think that's the ideal place for to teach about secularism. It is there, but it's not really done properly. Nobody really knows what they're supposed to be doing with it. So some schools teach citizenship, some schools don't. I think we need to improve the status of citizenship education. So I think it's a really important subject, and I think bring religion and belief into that subject, and let's be a lot more clearer about what that subject is.
The only people who have to get the civic education, you might call it, the immigrants who are trying to get British nationality, who have to sit this exam.
That's a strange form of citizenship, isn't it? I would not qualify for citizenship.
I was going to say, if you went out into the street and asked people how many lords there are and how many members of parliament there are and so on, everyone, I think 90% are going to fail. I would not qualify for British citizenship. If I had to sit that test, I would not qualify.
We just had to take it over. I took an oath and nothing else. But it's.
But you know, like every other human being, Richard Dawkins also has his prejudices. I think about a year ago, he made an uncomplimentary remark about the Muslim call to prayer, which he said he didn't like its sound or it was threatening, but that he found church bells comforting.
Yeah, it's a cultural bias.
I would have said the reason why he found the Muslim call to prayer, whatever it was, unappealing or threatening, is that he associated it with Muslims. So he's already regarding Muslims as some kind of a threat to this country. So it doesn't sound good to him. So I thought, if there was a black person living in the southern United States in the days of slavery, or someone living in South Africa under apartheid, and he hears the sound of church bells, to him it's his masters who are going there to worship, so he won't like the sound of church bells.
Absolutely.
Well, I have to say, I don't like the sound of church bells because I live next to a church.
That's the thing.
And every Sunday morning they start ringing the bell, and I can't get a lie in.
That's the thing. I think most people will probably tolerate church bells. They happen between, 8 and 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning, sometimes on a Saturday if there's wedding. There's no major inconvenience. But if the call to prayer was broadcast out loud, I remember being in Morocco on holiday and being woken up at 5 o'clock, I think it was, in the morning.
Well, it can vary.
About 5 o'clock.
Not so much there.
I'm not sure I'd want that in my home.
In England it would vary a lot.
No, we have been to Morocco and it's so really muted down, isn't it? Okay.
Yeah.
You can hardly, you can just about hear it.
Is it a souk? Where do you stay in Morocco? Is
Forgot. The market.
Yeah, that's the souk, is the market. Riyadh.
Yes.
Is it yeah, Riyadh. My Riyadh was right next to a mosque.
Oh, right.
So at 5 o'clock, that was it. I was up. So maybe I'm with Dawkins on that one a little bit, but no, you're right. It's a cultural bias, and we all have them. We all have them.
Yeah. Unless anyone's got anything else to say. Oh, you were asking about where do we differ?
Yeah, I was interested in
The National Secular Society.
Oh yeah.
Campaign to ban kosher and halal. This is where we disagree.
Oh, interesting. Okay, good.
So this is where we stand with our Jewish brothers.
Okay, so our view on that would be we've come up with laws in the United Kingdom and across Europe that we don't cause unnecessary pain, suffering and distress to animals. That's the law.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good law.
Yeah.
So I think it should be followed by everyone.
I agree, but my answer to that would be once you quickly cut off the jugular, it takes a second for the animal to lose consciousness.
Yeah.
Not feeling any pain. So.
But my
I mean,
response to that would be the scientists disagree.
Oh.
Because if the British Veterinary Association, Compassion in World Farming and the RSPCA all support an end to non-stun slaughter. So I go with the scientists on that one. And if it does cause unnecessary pain, suffering and distress, then I think that's a good law, and I think everyone should be subject to the same law. But
yes,
but we can disagree. We can disagree.
Basically, I agree. Muslims don't believe in causing unnecessary pain or harm to the animal.
But you would say that it doesn't do that.
So I would say yes.
Yeah.
Send me a link to the research you're referring to.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to have a read at that.
Yeah. The British Veterinary Association have done quite a bit of research on that, and the Farm Animal Welfare Council as well. So there is research to suggest that. I mean, that's why the law exists. That's why all animals need to be stunned before slaughter. The law came about because the scientific evidence was there that it was a more humane way to do things.
Yeah.
So
I don't think anyone here would object, as long as the animal is alive.
Yeah.
Even if they're stunned and the heart is beating, I don't think anyone here would say.
So there's also the point that Islam didn't come and introduce this slaughter of this in this way, but it took the method which was at the time the most human for that time.
well, it was also the most sensible
Other
because
things weren't available.
yeah, well actually, and it was the most sensible. It was the way, yeah, exactly. It was the way of making sure that if you come across an animal on the street and it's dead, it's probably a good idea not to eat that because you don't know how that animal died and you could be infecting yourself. So there were very good reasons to make sure the animal was alive at the time of slaughter.
That's right.
That's irrelevant now. So things have moved on, and there's no compelling reason for that animal to need to be alive now, because with farming method, we know when an animal is diseased and not. So it's just not a factor anymore. But that's the origin of the reason why the animal should be alive at the time of slaughter and conscious at the time of slaughter. That's the origin for it. But it makes no sense in the modern concept.
For example, delivery when a woman is given birth. Now, at the time when Islam came, there weren't any pain relief treatments available. So
Gas and epidural.
yes, now so people in those days would have had some ways which mitigate that.
Mm-hmm.
Now they then become set in law in the religious teachings. So people then think that they can't be changed. So when there are modern methods which are even more effective for achieving the same end,
Mm-hmm.
then they think that that can't change can't be made because the religion has prescribed that. The religion probably prescribed it in order to alleviate suffering.
Yeah.
And now there's a method which wasn't there before to achieve the same end.
Yeah, you have to think about the intention, what the end was. Absolutely. Yeah.
Which is more effective in achieving that objective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tea, the most important part.
I think every religion agree with that.
Yes. Yes, I think so.
No one disagrees with that.
You know, the founder of Pakistan
Yes.
said during his brief period of rule, I think he gave an interview to an Australian radio station. He said that Pakistan is not going to be a theocracy. Pakistan is not going to be a theocracy run by priests with a divine mission. And then, of course, there's this famous speech in the Pakistan Constituent Assembly that you are free. You are free to go to your temples, to your churches, to your mosques. What your religion is not the business of the state. And then he went on to say, look at England. So many centuries ago, Catholics and Protestants were at loggerhead with each other. Thank God we are not starting in those days. So that's what he said in August 1947.
He also said time will come when in Pakistan.
He said Muslims will cease to be Muslims, Hindus will cease to be Hindus, Christians will cease to be Christians. I don't mean in the religious sense. but they'll all regard themselves as citizens of Pakistan.
Absolutely, yeah. In terms of identity,
Yeah.
you keep that identity, but your first and foremost identity is your
Yeah.
citizen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, thank you very much.
No, thank you very much.
So, I guess you came in thinking I'm walking into the lion's den,
Not at all.
into the enemy camp.
Not at all.
I'll be slaughtered.
I was pretty confident there would be a fair amount of agreement. But I like a little bit of disagreement, but it was mainly agreement, but never mind. That's fine.
But for us to hear something, I've never heard a speech from a person who belongs to a group like yours. So it's very enlightening for us. Yes,
Yeah.
it's good.
Yeah, I mean, I was also concerned that at least from some minds, this misconception about secularism should be removed, that it's somehow atheism and this kind of thing. It's something different. And I regularly get their updates, and I go on the website and see. And a lot of what they stand for and do, we agree with. I just want to thank everyone who joined us for our live streaming and our radio broadcast. Thank you very much. I hope you learned something about secularism, and that we'll see you for our usual Friday service, which strangely is on Friday. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.